The lobby of Monroe & Associates gleamed like a polished jewel. Italian marble reflected the crystal chandeliers hanging from the impossibly high ceiling. The air conditioning maintained the perfect temperature, and a discreet scent of imported essences floated through the space. Everything here seemed designed to remind visitors they were stepping into a territory of power. Isadora Lane pushed her cleaning cart down the 12th floor corridor. Her steps were silent, almost invisible. The bright blue uniform contrasted with her warm brown skin, and her long curls were tied back in a simple bun. She mopped the floor with precise, efficient movements. She'd been working here for 3 years now. Always the afternoon shift, always discreet. She knew every corner of this building. She knew where the sunlight hit strongest at 4 in the afternoon. She knew the sound of the elevators, the rhythm of meetings, even the hurried footsteps of executives who never looked at her. That Thursday afternoon, the corridor was busier than usual. An important meeting had just ended, and men in expensive suits paraded toward the elevators, talking loudly about quarterly numbers and market projections. Their laughter echoed off the walls. Isadora worked around them carefully, staying close to the wall. She'd learned long ago to make herself smaller in spaces like these. "Watch the floor, please," she said softly to a passing executive. "Still wet." He didn't respond, didn't even glance her way, just kept walking, phone pressed to his ear. She was used to it. Invisibility came with the uniform. Then she heard the voice that made everyone in the corridor turn their heads. "Is this what we pay for? Seriously?" Arthur Monroe stood near the elevator bank, hands in his pockets, head tilted back in that way that suggested permanent amusement. He was 28 years old, but carried himself like someone who'd never been told no. His tailored suit probably cost more than Isadora made in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. The son of Richard Monroe, founder and CEO of the company, Arthur had grown up in boardrooms and country clubs. He'd been handed everything since birth: private schools, luxury cars, executive positions he hadn't earned, and he treated the world like it existed for his entertainment. "Something wrong, Mr. Monroe?" one of his colleagues asked, eager to please. Arthur pointed at the floor near his Italian leather shoes. "Look at this, a streak, right there." Isadora followed his gesture. There was indeed a faint line on the otherwise spotless marble, barely visible, the kind of imperfection only someone looking for problems would notice. "I'll fix it right away, sir," she said calmly, moving toward him with her mop. "You'll fix it?" Arthur's voice dripped with mockery. "You mean you'll try again? Because clearly the first attempt didn't work out so well." Laughter rippled through the small crowd that had started to form. Executives who moments ago had been discussing mergers now stood still, watching the show. Isadora felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. She'd dealt with difficult people before. The trick was to stay calm, finish the job, and disappear. But Arthur wasn't finished. "Tell me something," Arthur said, taking a step closer to Isadora. His voice carried across the corridor, ensuring everyone could hear. "Do they not teach proper mopping techniques at wherever it is you people learn these things?" The words hung in the air like poison. Several people shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. No one ever did when Arthur started his performances. Isadora tightened her grip on the mop handle. She could feel a dozen pairs of eyes on her, waiting to see how she'd react. The old instinct screamed at her to apologize, to lower her head, to make herself even smaller than she already was. Instead, she looked directly at Arthur Monroe. "I'll take care of it, Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice steady. "If you could just step back a bit, the floor is still wet. I wouldn't want you to slip." It was a reasonable request, a polite request, but the way Arthur's face changed, you'd think she'd insulted his entire bloodline. "Excuse me?" His eyebrows shot up in theatrical disbelief. "Did you just tell me what to do?" "I just don't want anyone to get hurt, sir." "How thoughtful." Arthur's smile widened, but there was nothing warm about it. The cleaning lady is concerned about my safety. How touching. More laughter from the crowd. Louder this time. Someone pulled out their phone. Arthur took another step forward, deliberately placing his shoe on the wet patch of floor. Then another step, even closer to Isadora, invading her space in a way that made several people in the crowd look away. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Look at that. I'm walking on your freshly cleaned floor. Better add it to the list of things you can't do properly." Isadora could smell his cologne, expensive, overpowering. She could see the challenge in his eyes, the certainty that she would back down, because people like her always backed down from people like him. That was how the world worked. That was the natural order of things. She took a slow breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, don't ever let anyone make you feel small. You're worth just as much as anybody else in this world." The corridor had gone completely silent. Even the elevator had stopped dinging. Everyone was watching now, waiting for the janitor to apologize or run away or break down. That's what usually happened in moments like these. But Isadora Lane had spent 27 years being invisible, being talked over, being treated like part of the furniture. And something in her, something that had been building for 3 years in this building, finally said, "Enough." She set down her mop carefully, straightened her shoulders, and looked Arthur Monroe directly in the eyes. "Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice clear and calm, "you can mock my work. You can make jokes. But let me tell you something." Arthur's smirk faltered slightly. He wasn't used to being interrupted, especially not by the help. "A person's worth," Isadora continued, her voice carrying through the silent corridor, "isn't measured by how much money they have or what last name they were born with. It's measured by how they treat other people, especially the ones who can't do anything for them." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Arthur's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, and then something darker. Anger. How dare this woman, this janitor in her cheap uniform, speak to him like that? In front of his colleagues? In front of people who worked for his father? "Are you seriously—" he started, but Isadora wasn't finished. "I come here every day," she said. "I clean these floors, these windows, these bathrooms. I do my job with pride because work is work, and dignity isn't something that comes from a title on a door. It comes from how you carry yourself, how you treat people when no one's watching." She paused, letting her words sink in. Several people in the crowd were nodding almost imperceptibly. One woman had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. "You want to know what I see when I work here?" Isadora's voice was softer now, but somehow more powerful. "I see people who say please and thank you. People who hold doors open. People who remember my name even though they don't have to. And I see people who walk past me like I'm invisible, who leave messes for me to clean up without a second thought, who treat me like I'm less than human because I wear this uniform." Arthur's jaw was clenched so tight you could see the muscle twitching. His hands had formed fists at his sides. "Which kind of person are you, Mr. Monroe?" Isadora asked quietly. "Because right now everyone here is watching. Everyone here is deciding what kind of man you really are." The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to drop. Arthur opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in his entire privileged life, he had no response, no clever comeback, no dismissive laugh. He looked around at the crowd, at his colleagues, his father's employees, the people who usually laughed at his jokes and agreed with everything he said. But now they were looking at him differently, some with pity, some with something that might have been shame. A few were even looking at Isadora with open admiration. "This is ridiculous," Arthur finally managed to say, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "I don't have to stand here and be lectured by—" "By who?" Isadora interrupted gently. "By someone who works for a living? By someone who wasn't born with everything handed to them? By someone who knows what it means to earn respect instead of demanding it? Arthur's face flushed deep red. His breathing quickened. For a moment, Isadora thought he might actually explode right there in the corridor. Instead, he did something worse. He pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly, then held it up like a weapon. "You know what?" His voice was shaking now, fury barely contained. "I'm calling security, and then I'm calling my father. You're done here. Finished. By the end of the day, you'll be clearing out your locker." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was escalating fast. Too fast. "You're going to fire her?" A voice came from the back of the group. "For what?" "For defending herself." Arthur spun around. "For being insubordinate. For disrespecting a member of the Monroe family. For telling the truth." Another voice, this time from a woman in a gray suit. She was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Isadora recognized her. Margaret Chen, head of human resources. She'd always been polite when they crossed paths in the halls. "Ms. Chen, this doesn't concern you," Arthur said coldly. "Actually, it does." Margaret stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "HR concerns are my domain, Mr. Monroe, and I'm trying to understand what policy this employee has violated. From what I just witnessed, she responded professionally to a provocation." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "Are you defending her?" "I'm following company protocol," Margaret replied calmly, "which states that all termination decisions must go through proper channels, and that all employees have the right to be treated with basic respect, regardless of their position." The tension in the corridor was thick enough to cut with a knife. Arthur looked like he was about to have a stroke. His carefully constructed moment of power had turned into a public humiliation. "Fine," he spat. "We'll do this officially, through channels. See how that works out for her." He turned to Isadora, his eyes full of venom. "Enjoy your last few days here. Because my father will hear about this. And when Richard Monroe hears that some janitor embarrassed his son in front of half the executive floor, we'll see how long those proper channels protect you." With that, he stormed toward the elevators, jabbing the button repeatedly. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself was eager to swallow him up. He disappeared inside without looking back. The moment the elevator doors closed, the corridor erupted in whispered conversations. People pulled out their phones, texting rapidly. The story was spreading in real time, moving through the building like wildfire. Isadora felt her hands start to shake. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving behind the cold reality of what she'd just done. She'd stood up to Arthur Monroe, in public, in front of witnesses, and he'd promised retribution. Margaret Chen touched her arm gently. "Are you okay?" Isadora nodded, not trusting her voice. "That was incredibly brave," Margaret said softly. "Also possibly incredibly stupid, but mostly brave. I'm going to lose my job, aren't I?" Isadora's voice came out smaller than she intended. Margaret glanced around at the dispersing crowd, then lowered her voice. "Honestly, I don't know. Arthur has a lot of influence here, and his father. Well, Richard Monroe doesn't like bad publicity. This could go either way." "I shouldn't have said anything," Isadora whispered, more to herself than to Margaret. "I should have just apologized and moved on." "No." Margaret's voice was firm. "You did the right thing. Someone needed to say it. We've all been watching him behave like that for years, and no one's had the courage to call him out." "Courage?" Isadora laughed bitterly. "I can't afford courage. I have rent due in a week. My brother's starting college in the fall, and I promised I'd help with his books. I have a car payment, utilities, groceries." "I know," Margaret interrupted gently. "Believe me, I know. But what you did back there, that's going to matter. You'll see." Isadora wanted to believe her, but she'd been poor long enough to know that standing up for yourself was a luxury that people like her couldn't always afford. Rich people could have principles. They could walk away from jobs on moral grounds. They had safety nets and trust funds and family connections. She had a studio apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots sometimes echoed at night, and $53 in her checking account until next Friday. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," Margaret said. 9 o'clock. We'll talk about next steps, okay? In the meantime, finish your shift like normal. Don't give them any excuse to claim you abandoned your post. She squeezed Isadora's arm once more, then walked away, heels clicking purposefully down the corridor. Isadora picked up her mop with trembling hands. The floor was dry now, the evidence of her imperfect work long since evaporated. She moved her cart down the hallway, continuing her rounds as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. She could feel it in the way people looked at her as she passed. Some quickly glanced away, embarrassed. Others nodded or smiled. One young executive, a man she'd never spoken to before, caught her eye and mouthed the words, "Thank you." By the time her shift ended at 6 o'clock, Isadora was exhausted. Not from the physical work. She was used to that. But from the emotional weight of the afternoon. The constant replay of Arthur's face. The growing dread about what tomorrow would bring. She changed out of her uniform in the employee locker room, a cramped space in the basement that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Her phone buzzed as she was locking up. A text from her younger brother, Marcus. "Can you pick up milk on the way home? Also, did something happen at work? Your name is trending on Twitter." Isadora's blood ran cold. Trending? She fumbled with her phone, opening the app with shaking fingers. And there it was. A video. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation. The video had been posted by an account called A Corporate Truth, and in the 3 hours since the confrontation, it had been viewed over 200,000 times. The numbers kept climbing as Isadora stared at her phone screen, refreshing compulsively. "Janitor destroys spoiled rich kid with words alone," read the caption, followed by fire emojis and a string of hashtags. "Eat the rich," "Dignity," "Matters," "Isadora Lane." Someone had found her name. Her full name. It was in the comments, shared and reshared like wildfire. People were already digging into her background, finding her sparse social media accounts, sharing old photos. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. This woman is a queen. Finally, someone put Arthur Monroe in his place. She's going to get fired for this, you know. If they fire her, I'm boycotting Monroe and Associates. Easy to say when you don't work there. Someone start a GoFundMe for her legal fees. Isadora felt sick. This was exactly what she didn't need. Attention, scrutiny. Going viral meant going public, and going public meant there was no way Arthur Monroe would let this slide quietly. This had become about his reputation now, about not looking weak in front of the entire internet. She quickly made her social media accounts private, but the damage was done. Screenshots were everywhere. People were analyzing her words frame by frame, turning her moment of exhausted honesty into a social justice battle cry. The bus ride home felt endless. Isadora sat in the back, hood up, watching the video play again and again on her phone. She looked braver on camera than she'd felt in the moment. Her voice was steady, clear. Her words had weight, but all she could think about was the look on Arthur's face when he'd promised retribution. Her apartment building appeared through the grimy bus window, a 6-story concrete structure with cracked paint and barred windows. Home. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step heavier than the last. Marcus was waiting at the door when she arrived. At 19, he still had that gangly teenage energy, all long limbs and nervous enthusiasm, but his face was serious now. "Izzy, you're famous," he said, holding up his own phone. "Everyone at school is talking about this. My professor mentioned it in class. You're everywhere." "I know." She pushed past him into the small apartment, one room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen, with a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was clean. It was hers. And now she might lose it. "Are you okay?" Marcus followed her inside, hovering anxiously. "I mean, that was amazing what you did, but also, I'm probably fired, yes." Isadora dropped her bag on the floor and collapsed onto the worn sofa. "Margaret from HR wants to meet tomorrow morning. That's never a good sign. Maybe it's fine. Maybe they'll—" Isadora's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her hit the green button. "Isadora Lane?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Yes? This is Jennifer Park from Channel 7 News. I'd love to talk to you about what happened today at Monroe & Associates. Would you be available for an interview?" Isadora's heart sank. "How did you get this number?" "Public records. Miss Lane, the video of your confrontation with Arthur Monroe has now been viewed over 500,000 times. People are calling you a hero. Don't you want to tell your side of the story?" No, thank you. I'm not interested. The Monroe family has already released a statement saying they're investigating the incident. Don't you want to—" Isadora hung up. Her phone immediately buzzed with another call. Different number. She declined it. Then another, and another. "Unplug the landline," she told Marcus, who quickly obeyed. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the constant buzzing of Isadora's phone as call after call came through. "You could do the interviews," Marcus said quietly. "Tell people what really happened. Get ahead of whatever story the Monroes are going to tell. And say what? Please don't fire me for standing up for myself. That's not a story, Marcus. That's just sad. It's honest. Honesty doesn't pay rent." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better. He'd watched his sister work 2 jobs to support them after their mother died. He'd seen her skip meals so he could eat. He knew exactly how expensive honesty could be. Isadora's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Thomas Reed from the New York Times. The Monroe story is going national. I'd like to—" She turned off her phone entirely. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Isadora lay on the sofa. Marcus had the bedroom. She'd insisted on that from day one, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone's car alarm went off and didn't stop for 20 minutes. She thought about her grandmother, who'd raised her after her parents' divorce. A woman who'd cleaned houses for 40 years and never complained once. Who'd taught Isadora that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you gave it away. "You'd probably say I did the right thing," Isadora whispered to the darkness. "You'd tell me to hold my head high, no matter what happens." But her grandmother had never had to worry about going viral, had never faced the wrath of a billionaire's son, had lived in a simpler time when standing up for yourself didn't become entertainment for millions of strangers. At 3 a.m, Isadora finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, full of dreams where she was cleaning an infinite corridor that kept getting dirtier no matter how hard she worked. She woke at 6 to the sound of her phone vibrating across the coffee table, still turned off but somehow still buzzing with ghostly messages. It was time to face whatever came next. Margaret Chen's office was on the 8th floor, far from the executive suites but still nicer than anywhere Isadora had ever worked. Real plants instead of plastic ones. A window with an actual view. Framed degrees on the wall. Margaret looked tired when Isadora walked in at 9 o'clock sharp. There were dark circles under her eyes and her normally perfect hair looked hastily arranged. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Coffee?" "No, thank you." Margaret poured herself a cup anyway, her hands shaking slightly. That's when Isadora knew this was bad. HR directors didn't get nervous unless something serious was happening. "I'm just going to be direct," Margaret said, sitting down heavily. "Richard Monroe wants you fired. Arthur's been in his father's office since 7 this morning, showing him the video, reading him the comments, explaining how you attacked him in front of his colleagues." Isadora's stomach dropped. "Attacked? I never touched him." "I know. But Arthur's claiming you created a hostile work environment, that you were insubordinate and aggressive. He's trying to frame this as a safety issue, saying he felt threatened. That's insane. Everyone saw what really happened. Yes, they did. Which is why this gets complicated. Margaret took a long sip of coffee. Because while Arthur was upstairs spinning his version of events, I was down here getting calls. Lots of calls. From reporters, from employees. Margaret pulled out a folder thick with papers. 27 people have come forward in the last 16 hours. Current employees, former employees, all with stories about Arthur Monroe's behavior, harassment, verbal abuse, creating hostile work environments. Everything you'd need for a case. Isadora blinked. A case? A legal case. Against Arthur and potentially the company for enabling his behavior. Margaret's voice was careful, measured. These people are willing to go on record, Isadora. They've been waiting for someone to take the first stand. You gave them that. I didn't mean to start anything, I know, but you did start something, and now the company has a problem. Because if they fire you, all 27 of those people have already agreed to go public. The video is already viral. Add in verified accounts of years of abuse, the Monroe brand would be destroyed. Isadora tried to process this. So I'm not fired? It's more complicated than that. Margaret leaned forward. Richard Monroe is a businessman first and a father second. He sees the writing on the wall. The company's stock dropped 2 points this morning. Major clients are calling with concerns. The board is demanding answers. What does that mean for me? Margaret hesitated. It means you have leverage. Real leverage. But you need to be smart about how you use it. Before Isadora could respond, Margaret's office door opened. A man walked in, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Isadora's entire wardrobe. She recognized him from company photos. Richard Monroe himself. Ms. Lane. Richard Monroe's voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice used to getting its way through diplomacy rather than shouting. Thank you for meeting with me. Isadora stood up instinctively, then felt foolish for it. Why was she showing deference to this man? His son had humiliated her, and now he was here to... What? Apologize? Threaten her? Sit, please, Richard said, taking a chair across from her. Margaret stayed at her desk, watching carefully. Up close, Richard Monroe looked older than his photos. There were deep lines around his eyes, and his shoulders had the slight slump of someone carrying heavy weight. He looked tired, almost sad. I've watched the video, he said quietly, multiple times. And I've read the employee complaints Ms. Chen shared with me this morning. Isadora said nothing, her grandmother's voice in her head. Let them talk first. Never show your hand. My son behaved badly, Richard continued. Very badly. And apparently this wasn't an isolated incident. I was unaware of the extent of his behavior over the years. With respect, Mr. Monroe. Isadora found her voice. That's hard to believe. Buildings talk. People talk. You really didn't know. Richard's jaw tightened. Perhaps I didn't want to know. Arthur is my youngest child, his mother's favorite. After she died, I made excuses for him, enabled him, let him slide into the executive floors without earning it. He paused. That was my failure as a father and as a leader. So what happens now? Isadora asked. That depends on you. Richard folded his hands. I could fire you. Arthur wants that. He's demanding it. But Ms. Chen has explained the legal implications, and I'm not interested in a protracted lawsuit that would destroy this company my father built. So I'm supposed to just disappear quietly? Sign something saying I won't sue? No. Richard's voice was firm. I'm offering you a choice. You can leave with a generous severance package, 6 months' salary, health insurance, a neutral reference, walk away from all this, or... He paused, weighing his words. Or, Isadora prompted, or you can stay, transfer to a different department, full-time position with benefits, significant raise, and a personal apology from me and from Arthur. Isadora laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Arthur's going to apologize to me? The man who tried to get me fired this morning? He will if I tell him to, Richard said coldly. Arthur works for me, Ms. Lane. He seems to have forgotten that, along with many other important lessons, but he's about to remember. And if I say no to both options, then we all end up in court. The company suffers, people lose jobs, and everyone loses except the lawyers. Richard leaned forward. I'm trying to do the right thing here. I'm asking you to help me. Isadora looked at Margaret, who gave the smallest nod. This was real. This was actually happening. I need time to think, Isadora said finally. Richard nodded. You have until Monday. That's 3 days. In the meantime, you're on paid leave. Take the weekend. Talk to a lawyer if you want. I'd recommend it, actually. Make sure you understand all your options. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. For what it's worth, Ms. Lane, what you said to my son was right. Painfully right. And this company needs more people willing to speak truth, not fewer. After he left, Isadora sat in stunned silence. Margaret came around the desk and sat beside her. What do I do? Isadora whispered. Whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want, not what's safe, not what's easy, what you actually want. Isadora spent the weekend in a fog. Marcus tried to convince her to take the money and run. 6 months' salary. That's more than you make in a year. You could go back to school, start over somewhere better. But something nagged at her. Taking the severance felt like admitting defeat, like proving Arthur right, that she didn't belong in that building, that people like her should know their place and stay quiet. On Saturday afternoon, her phone buzzed with a call from another unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Isadora? A woman's voice, older, warm. This is Patricia Simmons. You don't know me, but I worked at Monroe & Associates 15 years ago. I was a secretary on the executive floor. Okay, Isadora said cautiously. I saw your video, and I want you to know, what you did took courage. Real courage. I wish I'd had that courage when Arthur's older brother harassed me for 2 years straight. When I finally reported it, Richard Monroe offered me money to go away quietly. I took it. I've regretted it every day since. Isadora's throat tightened. What happened to the brother? Nothing. He left the company eventually to start his own firm, but he faced no consequences. And I let that happen because I was scared and needed the money. Patricia's voice cracked. Don't make my mistake. Don't let them buy your silence. What you're doing matters. After they hung up, Isadora sat on her worn sofa and thought about all the Patricia Simmonses who'd come before her. All the people who'd been offered money to disappear, all the small injustices that added up to something much larger. She thought about her grandmother, scrubbing floors on her knees for 40 years, about Marcus, who needed to believe the world could be fair, about all the other workers in that building who'd watched Arthur Monroe behave like a tyrant and felt powerless to stop him. On Monday morning, Isadora walked into Margaret Chen's office at 9 o'clock sharp. She'd made her decision. I'm staying, she said firmly. I want the full-time position, the raise, the benefits, and I want Arthur's apology, in writing, public, and genuine. Margaret smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The apology happened in the same corridor where the confrontation had occurred. Richard Monroe insisted on it. Scene of the crime, he called it with a grim smile. Arthur arrived 15 minutes late, wearing sunglasses indoors and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. His jaw was clenched so tight Isadora worried his teeth might crack. Margaret had organized it carefully. No crowd this time, just a few key witnesses, department heads, HR representatives, and a company lawyer taking notes. And one camera recording everything for the record. Richard stood beside his son, and the contrast was striking. The father looked tired but resolute. The son looked furious, humiliated, like a child being forced to apologize for breaking a vase. "Arthur?" Richard prompted quietly. Arthur removed his sunglasses. His eyes were bloodshot, and Isadora realized with some surprise that he'd been crying. Good, she thought, then immediately felt guilty for the thought. "Isadora Lane," Arthur began, his voice flat and rehearsed. "I want to apologize for my behavior last Thursday. My comments were inappropriate, disrespectful, and beneath the standards we hold at Monroe and Associates. I should not have mocked your work or invaded your personal space. I'm sorry." The words were right, but the delivery was wooden. This was compliance, not genuine remorse. Isadora could see it. Everyone could see it. "Do you accept his apology?" Richard asked Isadora directly. She looked at Arthur for a long moment, really looked at him. Beneath the expensive clothes and the trust fund arrogance, she saw something unexpected, a deeply unhappy person. Someone who'd been handed everything but earned nothing. Someone who'd probably never been told he was wrong in his entire life until this moment. "I accept it," Isadora said finally. "But I want to be clear. This isn't about me forgiving you, Mr. Monroe. This is about you understanding why what you did was wrong. Not because you got caught. Not because it went viral. But because every person in this building deserves basic respect, regardless of their job title." Arthur's face reddened. For a moment she thought he might argue, might break character and reveal his true feelings. But Richard placed a hand on his shoulder, and Arthur swallowed whatever he'd been about to say. "Arthur will be taking a leave of absence," Richard announced. 6 months. During that time, he'll be working with an executive coach on leadership and interpersonal skills. If he returns, it will be in a junior position where he'll need to work his way up based on merit, not family name. Arthur looked like he'd been slapped. "Dad, we didn't discuss—" "We're discussing it now," Richard said firmly. "You have a choice, son. Accept these terms or find employment elsewhere. No more Monroe name protecting you. No more free passes." The room went silent. Everyone understood what was happening. Arthur Monroe was being stripped of his privilege, at least partially. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. Arthur looked at Isadora one last time, and in his eyes she saw not hatred, but something more complicated. Fear, maybe. Or recognition. 3 months later, Isadora sat in her new office on the 6th floor. It was small, barely bigger than a closet, really. But it was hers. Assistant Coordinator of Facilities Management. It came with a desk, a computer, benefits, and a salary that let her breathe for the first time in years. Marcus had started college in the fall, just like she'd promised. Full scholarship, but she could help with books and living expenses now. They'd even moved to a better apartment. 2 bedrooms, with windows that actually opened and a neighborhood where gunshots weren't part of the nightly soundtrack. The video had faded from public consciousness, replaced by the next viral moment, the next outrage, the next fleeting story. But within Monroe and Associates, everything had changed. 4 executives had been quietly let go after internal investigations revealed patterns of misconduct. The company had implemented mandatory sensitivity training. Anonymous reporting systems had been established. It wasn't perfect. Institutional change never was. But it was progress. Isadora still saw the cleaning staff every day. She made a point of learning their names, asking about their families, saying thank you. Small gestures that meant everything because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. One afternoon in late October, there was a knock on her office door. She looked up from her computer to see Arthur Monroe standing in the doorway. He looked different, thinner. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by khakis and a button-down shirt. His hair was less perfectly styled. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like an actual person, rather than a caricature of privilege. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Isadora hesitated, then nodded. Door stays open. Of course. Arthur entered, standing awkwardly in the small space. I'm back, starting today, junior analyst in the research department. I heard. Everyone had heard. The whispers had been circulating for days. Arthur Monroe, returning in disgrace, having to work his way up like everyone else. I wanted to talk to you before I officially started. I know my apology 3 months ago was terrible. I was angry and embarrassed, and I said the words, but I didn't mean them. He paused, looking down at his hands. I mean them now. Isadora studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But all she saw was exhaustion, and something that might have been genuine remorse. What changed? She asked. Therapy mostly. My dad made it a condition of coming back. I've been seeing someone twice a week. Arthur laughed bitterly. Turns out I have a lot of issues. Who knew? Everyone knew, Isadora said bluntly. Fair. He nodded. Look, I'm not asking you to forgive me or be my friend or anything like that. I just wanted you to know that what you did, standing up to me, it was a wake-up call. A really painful, humiliating, necessary wake-up call. Good, Isadora said simply. Arthur looked like he wanted to say more, but he just nodded and turned to leave. At the doorway he paused,